Got it. Well, and actually tomorrow, and I only know this because I have it in my Google Calendar, and this is the one benefit to Google Calendars is you can have something repeat every year so you don't have to remember it. Tomorrow is actually the first day I had my comprehensive Parkinson's disease clinic back in 2016, and I believe David was there. Going back, it's hard to believe it's been that many years. Well, anyway, welcome to the party, everybody. I'm Dr. Leichliter. I am a so-called movement disorder specialist at Allegheny Health Network, which means I'm a neurologist who thinks he specializes in movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease. This is a good place to ask questions. And so I've gotten some in email. If you're new to this, so there's generally a chat box down at the bottom. That's where it's a good place to type in any questions you can come up with. Now, the caveats that I always throw out are this is not a great place to ask individualized questions. So, this is not a, hey, I've been having this symptom, I'm on this medicine, what do you think I should do next? My answer is almost always going to be you should talk to your doctor. If I am your doctor, this is not a great place to talk to me. Send me a message on my chart for me. The other thing I like to tell people is everything I give you is my opinion. I like to think my opinion is based on as much scientific fact as I can find or come up with. I do try to keep up to date in Parkinson's disease and other conditions on what's going on, but there's not always good data. And so sometimes I do indeed have to make stuff up. I usually tell you when I'm making stuff up. I'll throw up some quotation marks and tell you I'm making stuff up because there's not exactly scientific evidence for everything that we're going to talk about here, but I'll do my best. And with that, go ahead and start typing your questions into the chat box. I'm going to start with the questions that I already got in my email, and then we'll kind of see how it goes along the way. And I am on call right now, so if I get I don't know, if somebody's looking for me urgently, I may have to take a quick break, but I told my team not to call me during this time. We'll see if they listen. All right, so the first question I got was about ultra light or red light therapy. And so I was actually nicely accompanied by a YouTube video, which I watched. And so what is it? So it's basically red light therapy or near infrared light therapy. And this has been looked at for a while. The hard part here, and I'm going to start with this, is the data is limited, much like everything that's alternative medicine, supplemental medicine, other things that aren't necessarily FDA approved. It's a lot of hard work to get data. And so there was a couple of kind of publications about this with the idea, from what I gather on how this works, is, again, there's all these different contraptions that shine red light on you, and it generally boils down to mitochondrial dysfunction. And so we think about the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse cells or powerhouse components of the cells, being damaged somehow in Parkinson's disease, either from a toxin or from some other cellular mechanism. But these kind of the parts of the cell that control the power or the energy source of the cells are called the mitochondria. And we know that these are damaged in some way in Parkinson's disease. And theoretically, this red light or infrared light apparently protects the mitochondria, or even potentially allows it to improve. Again, much like my idea and my thoughts on things like this for everything are show me the data. I am I'll believe it when I see it kind of guy. Some classify it as negativity. I classify it as realistic expectations. But again, I just feel like in our community and in our world, we've been burned so many times by something that looks good, right? How many times do we hear the news article, oh, breakthrough, oh, earth shattering, oh, game changer, right? The news likes to throw out fun words. And initially they look great, right? In animal models and cell line models, they look good. In small proof of concept trials, they look good. In safety trials, they look good, only to get to more rigorous types of trials and they don't work. And again, this might very well be something that's interesting and beneficial and helpful, maybe even game changing. I don't know. But until I see good human trials, good data, good scientific evidence, I'm skeptical. Again, there are over-the-counter red light things you can buy. There are actually places you can go to get red light therapy. And so if you're interested, I don't think there's a lot of risk. I don't think there's a lot of harm to it. But at the end of the day, there's not enough data for me to say, yes, this is a great idea. I watched his video. I learned a little bit about the science behind what they think they're accomplishing. But again, until I see good data, I'm a skeptic by nature. And so my short answer to that question is, if you want to try it, be my guest. I have no idea how much it costs. My overwhelming bet would be that it's not covered by insurance. But at the end, and I don't think it's particularly damaging or dangerous or risky, which is why I'm okay with it. But at the same time, I'm not sure there's enough data for me to say, yes, this is a great idea. Actually, the second group of questions, because the next ones came in a big group. Is significant pain, if significant pain is an obstacle, what would be the next steps? Not everything attributed to Parkinson's disease or Parkinsonism, but the next question was, can dopamine loss also contribute to the feeling of pain more significantly, and is there any difference in male or females? Now, this was a lot to unravel in the question. Pain is not an uncommon problem in Parkinson's disease. The problem is pain comes in a lot of different varieties, particularly in Parkinson's disease. And trying to get to the underlying source is the best way to try to approach and treat pain in Parkinson's disease. For instance, a lot of my patients have neuropathy. Neuropathy is a pretty common thing. Maybe it's a side effect of different versions of levodopa, but at the end of the day, neuropathy can be painful. This is usually burning or electrical pain. A lot of my patients have joint pain, knee pain, hip pain, back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, purely because their mechanics are wrong. So again, most of you know, a lot of people are flexed forward, heads down, arms in tight. You don't swing your arms when you walk. You come down on the wrong part of your foot when you walk. All of that puts increased stress and strain on your joints. Believe it or not, whatever power you believe in that created you did a very good job initially. Your mechanics are built with a specific set of movements in mind, and you guys don't do any of those. And when you don't follow the appropriate mechanics that your body was designed for, it puts a lot of stress and strain on joints. Joints generally take the brunt of that inappropriate movement. And what you end up doing is wearing out joints. So a lot of my patients need knee replacements, hip replacements, back surgeries, neck surgeries, shoulder surgeries. And that's a whole nother type of pain that's treated completely different. There's also pain that can come with muscle cramping, dystonic pain. So if you get toe curling or fisting, that can be painful. Just stiffness in general that comes along with Parkinson's disease can be painful. Some people notice when they wear off, it's a wearing off phenomenon of pain. And so there's actually a lot of different kinds of pain that can be experienced by people with Parkinson's disease. And they're all treated differently. If you have neuropathic pain, I use medicines like gabapentin and Lyrica. If you have joint pain, well, then I get you to the orthopedics or physical therapist, and we use a lot of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medicines, injections. If you have dystonic pain, then maybe I need to use anticholinergic medications or Botox injections. If you're wearing off and that's painful, maybe I just need to up your dopaminergic medications. Again, the key here is trying to figure out what type of pain are we dealing with, what do we think it's coming from, and then specifically try to target that component or that underlying cause about pain. As far as I know, dopamine loss doesn't necessarily directly contribute to feeling pain more significantly, or at least not that I've heard of or not that I've read. I tried to piece this together. Dopamine's in the reward pathway. It definitely plays a role in mood, as well as motivation. So maybe that could play a role in some pain, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch. And I haven't read any literature to suggest that people with Parkinson's disease experience pain more than anybody else. I can look, but I haven't come across that. And at the end of the day, if that is the case, then again, treatment with with dopamine type medicines may be beneficial. But again, not another thing that I really haven't come across, where unless it's a wearing off pain, the other types of pain in Parkinson's disease don't tend to respond to more medicine. And as far as I know, the experience of pain is not really different from men and women. Everybody kind of complains of a lot of similar things, male or female. I haven't necessarily run into anything different. Now, men do tend to be wimpier than women, just in general. Sorry, guys, it's true. It's why we don't have babies. And so at the end of the day, women probably tolerate pain better than we do. But I don't think there's necessarily yay or nay, one's experiences it more or less than another. And that would be a really hard thing to prove anyway. Is Parkinsonism or Parkinson's, if Parkinsonism or Parkinson's plus progresses more quickly, is exercise still shown to help delay? Yes and no. So the short answer is no. Exercise is not shown to delay the Parkinson's plus conditions, but I still think it's the best chance you have. From our knowledge or understanding of exercise and how it does, coming back to the mitochondria talk we just talked about, how it impacts mitochondria, how it impacts pain, how it impacts mood, how it impacts muscular strength, core strength, truncal stability, balance to some extent. It's probably still the best chance we have if there is a chance of trying to slow things down. Do I have any actual evidence of that for the Parkinson's plus conditions? No, not direct evidence, not good evidence that I would hang my hat on, but I'm pretty sure that nothing else does. And so at the end of the day, the medicines that we have definitively don't do that. And so exercise is still the best chance that we have. So even though I would love to answer that question and say, yes, exercise definitively slows down the Parkinson's plus conditions or the Parkinsonisms, I can't in good consciousness say that. But at the end of the day, it's still what I'm going to recommend to you. It's still my favorite thing to talk about. It's still what I'm going to have you do because I still think it gives us the best chance. A rheumatologist said stiffness after inactivity is gelling phenomenon, which, believe it or not, I had to look up gelling phenomenon, and now I know what gelling phenomenon is, which I'll cover in a minute. However, it seems to be changing. Once starting to move from one end of the house to the other, it feels like you should already be at the destination when only halfway there. Can gelling be mistaken for a hint of Parkinson's disease? And so I looked this up. And the long story short is gelling is particularly prominent or a thing in people with osteoarthritis, particularly in like the knees. And when you get up, the idea is that fluid in your joint is kind of gelled, it thickens. And then once you get moving, it kind of loosens up, it unthickens or loosens, and you move a little bit better. The hard part is a lot of my patients with Parkinson's disease say exactly the same thing. They say, hey, if I sit for a while, if I've been resting, when I get up in the morning, I'm pretty stiff, but kind of as I get going and I get moving, I start to loosen up, I feel better. Is that gelling? Maybe. A lot of my patients with Parkinson's disease also have osteoarthritis. Is it just a Parkinson's phenomenon? Maybe. Is it just what happens in terms of stiffness and loosening of muscles and joints? Maybe. I don't really know the answer to that question. Could somebody think that your arthritis is just gelling and it actually be an early sign of Parkinson's disease? That's definitely possible. I don't know the answer to that question. I do have an idea behind the second part of that question, which is why, you're walking across the room or you're doing any type of task and you're only halfway there and you really feel like you should be done. And that is a Parkinson's disease thing, at least I think. That's similar to, take voice, for instance. So speech comes out very, very quiet, but in your head, it sounds like you're talking in a normal voice. There are definitely mechanisms in your brain that sort of reset. You think you're doing this, but realistically, you're only doing this. And this comes down to regulation things in your brain that just aren't functioning correctly. And so I do think that part of the question is something along the lines of what I see in Parkinson's disease, where it does feel like you've gone the whole way across the room and you only find out you're halfway there. Does that mean whoever it is that asked that question has Parkinson's disease? Well, no, I can't say that via a question. I'm not that good. And so at the end of the day, it sounds like you should bring it up to somebody. It sounds like you should kind of get looked at if you're not already, and have somebody kind of give an idea of what they think's going on. But the short answer to your question is, now that I have an understanding of what gelling is, it does sound a whole lot about similar to what my Parkinson's patients do. So I do think there could be a potential for a misdiagnosis or a mistake. Does the rate of progression of Parkinson's disease change? I.e., if somebody is initially progressing quickly or slowly, is it likely that she will continue to progress quickly or slowly throughout the course of disease? And of course, I'm going to say yes and no, because I never give you a straight answer. Where would the fun in that be? Parkinson's disease is not a straight line. I mean, I feel like you guys all know this. I don't think that's an earth-shattering statement. But when somebody asks me, can you predict what's going to happen? I kind of treat it like it is. And so the best answer to that question is I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I usually tell my patients is you can sort of extrapolate by saying, okay, what happened over the past month or 6 months or year or 5 years? And maybe anticipate that that's what you can expect over the next month or 6 months or year or 5 years. And then I usually follow that up with saying, that's not written in stone. I'm just guessing on that one. We know it's not a straight line, but there isn't really a good way to predict. I would say as a general rule of thumb, people who progress quickly tend to keep progressing quickly, and people who progress slowly tend to keep progressing slowly. But obviously, much like everything else, there's always, rules and bones are made to be broken. And so at the end of the day, that's not always the case. And this is exactly why, I get a lot of patients to say, oh, what stage am I in? Right? Everybody wants to know what stage they're in. I feel like somebody gave a talk about staging once and everybody tuned in and paid attention. And generally they're talking about a Hahn and Yar scale. And these were neurologists out of, I want to say Harvard, but I might be making that part. That's a made up name. I honestly don't know where they studied. But they came up with this scale about Parkinson's disease, and it's 1 through 5. And it generally goes, 1 is unilateral symptoms, meaning you only have symptoms on one side. 2 is bilateral symptoms, meaning you have symptoms on both sides. 3 is bilateral symptoms with some balance problems. 4 is more severe balance problems. 5 is bad balance problems. Yes, those are all subjective. Yes, I made that up. But the problem with the scale, which is what I try to tell people is that it's not actually linear. The time it takes to go from stage 1 to stage 2 is not the same amount of time it takes to go from stage 2 to stage 3. And likewise, most people live in stage 3 for a long time and maybe towards the end get to stage 4 and never get to stage 5. And so it's a similar answer to that question, which is in terms of predicting, yes, that's probably the best guess that I have. But I'm also well aware that my predicting is bad. And so if you ask me, how am I supposed to know, or what am I supposed to expect in the future? That's the answer I'm going to give you, which is look back at how you've been doing and extrapolate that forward. But I know full well that that is only partially accurate and probably not all that good of a prediction. But it's the best I got. All right, a couple more questions, and then I'll go to the chat box. So I thought this was an interesting question. Can deep brain stimulator surgery change your personality? I don't know. I think my first thought or my first answer is yes. Anytime you're I don't want to say monkey, doctoring, that's probably a better term for it. Anytime you're doctoring in the brain, which is what I do for a living, you can definitely have unexpected or unplanned consequences, right? I mean, look at all the side effects of the drugs that I give you guys or the medications that I prescribe. I mean, you could argue that hallucinations, paranoia, delusions are a very, very big change in personality, and that's coming from the medicines I give you. So could you extrapolate or think the same thing could happen if we put wires into your brain and electrically stimulate these areas? Sure. I mean, I think it probably could. Do I have any evidence to back that up? Not that I can think of offhand. I'd have to go back to the literature. I know there was at one point a look at kind of increasing depression or potentially even suicide after DBS, but I don't think they came to any major conclusions that, yes, this definitively leads to changes. In my experience, that's not a common thing in terms of complete change of personality, but I do think people are a little bit different in their mannerisms and how they act and how they respond and how they do following surgery. Again, it is a brain surgery. And we are electrically tinkering or doctoring again with electrical signals in your brain. That's got to do something. Not only, we hope that it helps you do better, but what are the potential consequences or side effects? I'm not sure that that's ever been studied or looked at in terms of personality testing before and after, but my general kind of initial thought is that yes, it could probably change personality. Again, I can't think of any of my patients offhand, at least not that are coming to my mind right now, that there was a significant or dramatic change or somebody came back and said, what did you do to this? This is not the same person. I can't think of any of those patients offhand, but at the end of the day, I do think it's possible that both what I do from a medication standpoint, but also from a surgical standpoint, could change personality, and it could be noticeable. I'm not sure though. I know that's a long-winded answer to say probably, but I don't know. And then the last question we had here was, did I hear about the new AbbVie pump, which is like an insulin type pump? And the short answer is yes. I'm not sure it's available yet, or I don't know how close we are to its availability, but I know there's actually a few pumps that are in the works in this country. The one from AbbVie, I believe, is a prodrug to carbidopa levodopa, which is supposed to be useful for people with Parkinson's disease who have a lot of fluctuations. Again, I haven't seen the data on it yet. I'm waiting for the trials to be published or presented, or the FDA to make something, or really I'm waiting for it to be readily available to me so that we can think about it and do it. There's also a apomorphine pump that's available in Europe currently that's supposed to be coming here that I haven't heard much. That's another kind of like subcutaneous or insulin pump type pump. We do have the Duopa pump, which is an intestinal infusion of levodopa that I've used a few times with mixed success, but again, in the right person, it makes sense. And so there's definitely more. We are seeing an uptick or an increase in kind of more aggressive, I don't want to say, yeah, I think that's accurate, more aggressive approaches, more invasive approaches than just typical medications. And again, I think it's because we need them, right? You know, the medicines are good, but we're always looking for something better. Is there a better way to treat symptoms? Is there a better way to smooth out ups and downs? Is there a better way to allow us to decrease medicines? Is there a better way to help quality of life? I mean, at the end of the day, if there is, then we should be looking into these. We should do it. And so at the end of the day, you're going to hear more about these things. I'm not entirely sure any of them are easily or readily available just yet. But if they're readily available in Europe, they're going to get here eventually, and new things are always coming down the pipeline. And so once we see what the FDA does on a lot of these things, I think hopefully we'll have more access to them, and then we can start using them, get comfortable with them, see if they are really that good, and then we can go from there. So I have heard about them. I'm reserving my judgment until I get more experience with them, or until I get to basically play with them for a little bit. And then I will get back to you and let you know about those ones. All right, now I'm going to go scroll over here to the chat box. All right, I'm having trouble with nausea off and on recently. Could it be Parkinson's related? Yes. What are the symptoms of too much or too little Cinemet? All the above. So nausea and vomiting are actually both part of the disease itself. So much like we think about constipation, right? We think about constipation being a pro-symptom of Parkinson's disease. Well, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news for you if you haven't figured this out yet, but it's not just the end of the GI system that's the problem. It's the whole GI system that is a problem in Parkinson's disease. And the whole GI system starts here and comes out the other end. So a lot of my patients have swallowing problems, esophageal motility problems, meaning things get stuck, gastric emptying problems, which means food sits in the stomach longer than it should and doesn't exit and go into the small intestines. This is why a lot of my patients don't feel hungry all that much, or eat significantly less than they used to, and oftentimes lose weight. Well, that can also lead to nausea. The small intestines slow down, the intestinal motility slows down, the colon slows down. This is why you get constipation. But the long and short of it is basically top to bottom, everything slows down, everything gets impacted. So that in and of itself as a disease process can definitely make you nauseous. Unfortunately, the biggest side effect to just about every medicine that I own is nausea and vomiting, particularly carbidopa levodopa. That's the number one side effect to it. And so you have a lot stacked against you in terms of stomach issues, GI issues, nausea, vomiting. So it could be disease related. It could be medication related. Too much usually leads to nausea, as well as potentially dyskinesias or extra movements, hallucinations, things like that. Not enough usually leads to kind of stiffness, slowness, and not being able to move very well. But sometimes as an off phenomenon, you can also get nauseous and sick to your stomach. And so that's a hard thing to try to answer. And the best way to try to pinpoint it is kind of see how it fits with your medicines. Does it correlate with when you take your medicines or anything else, any pattern that you can come up with? But realistically, the short answer to your question is yes, all of the above can lead to nausea and vomiting. And it's something that we got to work on. And it's something that we have to try to tease out to figure out the best way to work on it. Is there an indication for nutritional supplements such as CoQ10? You're not going to like this answer, but yes, the indication for CoQ10 is CoQ10 deficiency, which is actually a disease. But I don't think that's the question you're asking. Is there an indication for nutritional supplements in Parkinson's disease for things like CoQ10? And the answer is depends how you define indication. And yes, I know I'm being vague for various reasons. So CoQ10 is good. At the end of the day, if there is a supplement that has data behind it, believe it or not, CoQ10 is the one that actually has a study to support its use. Now, that being said, the caveat to that is the study was only done in about 22 people or something like that, and they used 1,200 milligrams a day. Now, if any of you people were on CoQ10, you know that 1,200 milligrams of CoQ10 is a huge amount of CoQ10 and probably would put you in the poorhouse if you tried to buy it and use it. And the data was iffy. It did seem like there was a suggestion that the people that took high doses of CoQ10 did better than the people who didn't. But again, it was a small study. It was not reproduced. And it's really asking you to take a lot of over-the-counter supplement, more than really people generally take. Most people take 100, 200, something like that. So if you count that as an indication, maybe. I think that's a bit iffy if you want. Indication seems like a strong word for that type of a research study or that type of a thing. But on the other hand, most of the other supplements that are out there don't even have that kind of a research study. And so, in terms of research available for over-the-counter supplements, CoQ10 is the one that I'm aware of that actually does have a fairly good study. But is it enough to say it's indicated? Nah, I doubt it. And my idea about CoQ10 is the same idea I have about red light therapy. It's the same idea I have about every other supplement you can ask about, which is you're never going to have any actual good evidence for them. And that's going to be a tough thing. Give me one.
Casey,
Yes.
I just wanted to bring up to everybody that there was a good PMD Alliance talk on what to eat 2.0 just at 3 o'clock today, and it'll be available on their website tomorrow that talks about supplements and everything more in very detailed by immunologists. But in case people are interested.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's good. Tune in. Because again, the more information we learn about these things, the better off everybody's going to be, and the better evidence I'll have for you to really make better recommendations. Okay, and so the long story short is most of my ideas behind supplements are, as long as there's some science behind them, and most of them do have good science. They're either free radical scavengers, they're mitochondrial salvagers. They're cleaning up cellular debris. They are making cellular mechanisms work more effectively. And as long as they're not toxic, which I haven't run into any that have been toxic, and as long as they're not putting you in the poorhouse, because again, some of these do get particularly expensive, then I'm all for it if you want to try them. It's just when it comes to recommendations, if you come to me and ask, do you recommend this for Parkinson's disease, I'm going to need to see better studies and better data to give you that recommendation. That's kind of my general thought. Tips for helping somebody with Parkinson's disease understand time, day, concept of when things happen, and so this is really getting to the cognitive changes that can happen in Parkinson's disease, and that's easier said than done for a lot of reasons. So I talk to patients all the time. A lot of my patients are, we'll just say, elderly. A lot of my patients are retired. A lot of my patients don't really care what day it is or what month it is or what year it is. That's actually not really that important for day-to-day living. And yes, you go to the doctor, and of course, every doctor says, all right, where are you at? What's the month? What's the year? You know, this is what we're trained to do in terms of orientation questions. And usually I get, well, I don't know. That's not, I don't get a newspaper anymore. That's not really that important. The short answer to your question is do your best. So make sure you keep calendars everywhere. Make sure you write everything down. Reorientation, kind of going over, hey, this is what day it is. This is what month it is. This is when that doctor's appointment is. This is when that meeting is. Put it on a big calendar. All the things that you're probably already doing are probably the best things for you, or to try to help with that. Cognitive changes and things like that are difficult to treat with medicines. Again, they're not really things that respond all that way to medicines. You know, I will use a lot of the Alzheimer's disease medicines in my Parkinson's disease patients for a variety of things, but, you know, things like this might be something I try. Speech therapy also does cognitive therapy, and sometimes they have different tips and tricks to try to help people with day-to-day tasks and time and things like that. But it's a tough one. There's no easy answer for that. And at the end of the day, probably all the things you're doing are the best things you can do. And you just have to keep doing your best. I'm not sure I have a better solution for that. And I'm not sure I have a good medicine for that, or really a good answer. How do you treat tingling and burning sensation in the feet? And is it caused by Cinemet? Well, maybe. The hard part, so tingling and burning is what we like to call paresthesias. Oftentimes we'll term it neuropathy, because that's how it's described in people who have neuropathy. And so what is neuropathy? The long and short of it is neuropathy is basically the very tiny nerve endings going down to your hands and feet that are being killed off, either directly by something toxic, or the small blood vessels that feed the small nerves are being blocked by, you know, in diabetes, this is what happens. The blood sugar floating around blocks off those tiny blood vessels, and that kills the nerve. But diabetes is not the only thing that leads to neuropathy. There's a ton of things that lead to neuropathy, which we're not even all that good at testing for. Neuropathy was actually a side effect of the intestinal infusion of levodopa, I believe, and I think it's been related to even the oral versions of carbidopa-levodopa. And so could it be caused by Cinemet? Maybe. The hard part is neuropathy is also a ridiculously common thing, and common things being common, you could just be developing neuropathy as well as Parkinson's disease. And so that's a really hard question to try to answer, and probably we would never actually know the answer. We're also not all that great at treating it, particularly numbness and tingling. We do have medicines. This is where you'll hear about gabapentin or Neurontin or pregabalin and Lyrica, or a lot of the so-called neuromodulators. This includes amitriptyline, Cymbalta, things like that. But in my experience, those medicines are particularly good at neuropathic pain. So people who have neuropathy also typically have burning pain, electrical pain, shooting pain, and the medicines do typically work for that fairly well. But they don't really work well for numbness and tingling, or an uncomfortable situation, or feeling like I'm walking on gravel, or all the other descriptions that I get from my neuropathy patients. Those I have yet to find a good medicine for. And so at the end of the day, that's a much more difficult problem to try to work on. All right, this time I got to take it because it's the hospital. So give me another 5 minutes and I'll be right back.
Stuck with me. I just wanted to put a plug in for the conference. It's on Saturday, April 29th. It's at the Hilton Garden Inn South Point. We hope you can all attend. There's plenty of space. We have Val Busick, who's a speech and language pathologist, that will talk all about swallowing, speech, communication. She'll help us with vocal exercises. Dr. Leichliter will be presenting. He's going to do a mini talk with the doc, so you get to do that in person. We have Dr. Sarah Berman. She's also a movement disorder specialist she's from UPMC. She's going to be talking about mental health and, emotional mental health exercises that can help. The theme is exercise all around. And then our keynote is Jimmy Choi. and his wife, Cheryl Choi, will present on caregiving. Jimmy Choi has young onset Parkinson's, and he's going to talk about his journey and how exercise in particular helped him. It's very inspiring. So we hope you can come. It's on Saturday, April 29th, 8:30, roughly 8:30, 9 to 3. And the registration will be up soon. So it's just down south, Hilton Garden in South Point. And one other thing, I'm working backwards. There's a Penguins game on Monday, March 20th. And we get some of the proceeds. You can get a really neat pickleball paddle. Pickleball's really good as a form of exercise, especially with Parkinson's. And you can just go right to our website. You'll see it on the banner, and buy Penguins tickets that benefit PFWPA. So that's on Monday, March 20th at 7 p.m. It's going to be a great game versus the Ottawa Senators. Anyone have anything else? While Dr. Leichliter has to attend to a call because he's on call.
Casey, can you remind us about the memorial service for David Van Hoffen tomorrow?
Yes, it's on Saturday.
It's on Saturday, the 4th.
Yes, Saturday the 4th, and it's at 11 a.m. And it's at his church, which is in Moon. It's St. Philip's Church. I'll put the information in the chat.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share? It's
Did you say there's there will be some kind of seminar on supplements tomorrow?
supplements. No, not tomorrow. I think go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, PMD Alliance had the webinar today at 3 o'clock, but they'll have it on their website as a video to watch tomorrow. And it's What to Eat 2.0. And she talks about what to eat and what supplements to take and how much and what their latest findings are. And she's conducting a research study on, what was it, probiotics or something. But that was a really informative video. She gave it last year on what to eat 1.0. So this was an update to everyone.
I think it's all part of 1.0. I'll probably go back and watch 2.0 too. Because again, I like to learn about this stuff too. And this is one of the best ways to actually do it. So yes.
This one today that was held from 3 to 4, and then they'll be having it on their PMD Alliance resource page tomorrow as a video.
Great.
So it's really informative.
Yeah, no, again, I know I sound negative when it comes to supplements or it comes to over-the-counter things or it comes to alternative medicines, but I'm really not. I am very eager to learn about these things, figure out how they fit into what we do, figure out how it fits in to help people do better. And realistically, my whole goal, my whole job is to help people feel better, do better, live better. And if supplements are a good way to help amplify that or allow that, I am all for it. And so again, the more that I learn about these things, the more that we actually, can hopefully figure out how they all fit into, the treatment of patients and get people going in the right direction. I think I was finishing on basically at the end of the day, I do have medicines for pain in terms of neuropathic pain, but when it comes to actual tingling, that's a much harder thing to try to work on. What other medicines are available besides carbidopa-levodopa? Well, a whole bunches of them. So not only are there multiple varieties of carbidopa-levodopa, there's also medicines that fall into different categories. So there's dopamine agonists, which are pramipexole, ropinirole, rotigotine, apomorphine. There's COMT inhibitors, which are usually entacapone and opicapone. There's MAO inhibitors, which are usually selegiline, rasagiline, safinamide. There's other kind of miscellaneous medicines that I use a lot of, which are like amantadine, and there's a couple different varieties of that. There's Norians, which works more centrally. So there's actually a whole host of medicines that we use for Parkinson's disease, and they all have pluses and minuses. And this is really where it comes down to communicating with your doctor and your physician in terms of what are you trying to accomplish? How aggressive do you want to be? Because some medicines are more potent than others. What kind of risks are we okay with? Because each of them comes with their own set of risks, set of side effects, set of complications. And how does it fit in with what we're trying to accomplish? And so carbidopa, levodopa is the gold standard medicine for Parkinson's disease. But at the end of the day, it's not the only medicine we have. And there are other supplemental things that we will typically do. Any tips on getting to sleep at night? There's actually a whole host of things that you can do to try to help you sleep at night. And a lot of it comes down to sleep hygiene. So the last answer, the end answer, we've tried everything else answer is medicines. The other stuff that I think is more important are good sleep habits, and good sleep habits involve a whole host of things. There's papers and books written on sleep habits. There are things like, minimizing screen time before you go to bed or for a while, and maybe not exercising right before you get ready for bed, making sure you have enough downtime where you're either reading something or, doing mindfulness before bed. Making sure you're not trying to go to sleep with the TV on. It should be dark. It should be quiet. Going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time every day. Even if, for me, I get up at 5 o'clock for work every day. And on the weekends, I probably get up at closer to 6 or 7. That's probably not the best thing. You should really get up at the same time every day. And so the short answer is there's actually a lot of things that are written about. There's a lot of things that go into kind of sleep hygiene, sleep habits. There are actually specialists in sleep. So there are sleep specialists who can do things, not just tests, but also give you guidance on things like this. Being more active during the day and trying to avoid naps during the day. Exercise has actually been shown to help sleep in people with Parkinson's disease. I know I talk about exercise, but it really is the best idea for everybody. And so the short answer is there are things you can do that most of us don't do a very good job of, me included, in terms of trying to help you sleep at night. They're not always easy to do. Sometimes they're more complicated. Sometimes you're very set in your ways. I cannot convince my wife to not have the TV on to go to sleep. Not a chance. But at the end of the day, there are things like that you can work on. And then if you do all of those things and you're still having insomnia or difficulty with sleep, then we start thinking about things like melatonin over the counter, and then we start getting to more aggressive sleep aids. But they're really not my favorite way to try to help people sleep better. And I would try all the other things before I got to that. Coming back to the probiotic thing you were just mentioning. So there's a lot of ads or articles about the role of probiotics in treating Parkinson's. Is there much data to support using probiotics for Parkinson's disease? Again, there's a little bit. Scientifically, it does make sense. We know the gastrointestinal system is huge in the dopamine world. The enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system that controls your gut, has tons of dopamine type neurons or nerve cells. We know that somehow it starts in the gut, or some things start in the gut before you develop motor symptoms. There was one study that they looked at, I think it was in, I'm making it up, Sweden, maybe Finland, I don't know, somewhere like that, where they looked back retrospectively at people that had the vagus nerve cut for whatever reason, and they tended to be less likely to develop Parkinson's disease, thinking that that's the connection between the gut and the brain. But there's so much written about the gut-brain connection. And what we do know, which is a lot of things start in the gut before you develop motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. And there's been some data in the role of probiotics in trying to treat. I can't think of any definitive slam dunk trials that say, yes, look at this, it really does work. But again, this is a really hard thing to tease out, right? The gastrointestinal problems in Parkinson's disease aren't just one thing. It's going to be really hard to just change one thing and expect to see dramatic results. We're not sure how they're all tied together. And so even though, my argument would be that there's not good data for this, it's really hard to get good data for things like this, not to mention expensive. There is some, and so again, I'm not against probiotics. There's one in particular that people have looked at and specifically mentioned to me. I don't remember it offhand. I'd have to look it up. But at the end of the day, there is some data in Parkinson's with probiotics. Not enough for me to say everybody should be taking one. In all honesty, not enough for me to change my practice. But more to come on that. Again, as you mentioned, they are looking at this stuff. They're trying to study this stuff, but these are hard trials to design. They're hard trials to get good, clean data from. And so it's not their fault that there's limited data here. It is actually a really hard thing to study. But again, same idea. There's not much harmful in terms of probiotics. There is some science to back them up. And as long as they're not putting you in the poorhouse, I am all for it. Can I talk about ultrasound treatments to treat tremors? Do these treatments only help with the tremors? Well, that is $1 million question now, isn't it? So there's actually 2 different ultrasound things that are being looked at. So the one which I won't talk a whole lot about is it turns out if you give certain ultrasound frequencies, you can disrupt the blood-brain barrier. So the blood-brain barrier is the kind of barrier between the rest of your system and the nervous system. The nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord are really, really protected organs. Not a lot that happens that's floating around in your bloodstream, floating around in your other organs gets into your central nervous system. And it's because of this blood-brain barrier, which is a line of cells that are really tightly connected that bigger molecules or things cannot get through. It turns out if you zap people with ultrasound, and I am not entirely sure how they do this, where they put it, the mechanisms behind it, you can loosen up that blood-brain barrier. And they're actually looking at this because not all medications get across the blood-brain barrier. And so if you disrupt it a little bit, you can get those medicines easier into the central nervous system. That's still more of a research concept, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about it, but that is one use of ultrasound in potentially things like Parkinson's disease. The other one that is approved is something called high-frequency ultrasound ablation. And this is basically using ultrasound waves to burn a hole in your brain. So we learned a long time ago, and I don't remember if it's 70, 80, 90, 100 years ago, that if you put a hole in somebody's brain, you can stop them from shaking. I feel like they stumbled upon this accidentally, much like we stumble upon everything in medicine accidentally. But we've learned for a long time that if you put a hole in somebody's brain, you can stop tremor. They did this for a long time. They would drill a hole in somebody's skull. They would put a probe down. They would burn a hole. They would freeze a hole. They take it out. Michael J. Fox is not my patient, but I'm pretty sure he mentions in his book that he had that done. Fast forward probably 20 years ago, they learned that you could do the same thing via radiosurgery or gamma knife. So you can radiate a small hole and create a small hole. And it had the benefit of being external. You didn't have to drill a hole in somebody's skull. My opinion, the downside to the radiosurgery is it takes months to mature. So it's not as precise as I would like. They do a lot of radiosurgery like this in Europe, I think. I don't know if they still are, but they were. We don't do as much here. Fast forward to about 5 or 6 years ago, the people down in Maryland, it was mainly out of Maryland, I forget who else was involved in the study, found that you could use ultrasound waves to burn a hole in somebody's brain. It's under an MRI. So again, you're in an MRI machine. They focus the ultrasound beams where they want it, and then they can see that tissue heat up and they can control it. It's approved for essential tremor and tremor predominant Parkinson's disease. I have to be honest, I have sent a handful of essential tremor patients for it, and I have not yet sent any Parkinson's. And maybe I sent one, but I haven't heard back yet. And the reason for that is a couple things. So it turns out with this type of a procedure, at least currently, you can only do one side. They learned a long time ago with the open procedure that if you did both sides, you had significant memory problems and balance problems. And so it's only approved for one side use. In essential tremor, which is a different type of tremor problem that I take care of, this is an action tremor. So people with essential tremor have trouble eating or writing or pouring things. You can get away with doing one side. If I can stop their dominant hand from shaking, they can write, they can eat, they can do things. And yes, their other hand still shakes, but most people don't use their left hand or their non-dominant hand as much. They can get away with it. My problem in Parkinson's disease is that it is much more a bilateral symptom problem, and it's not just tremor. And so my understanding of it, which is fairly limited because it's not available in Pittsburgh at the moment, I'll come back to that in a second, is that it really works for tremor, and I'm not entirely sure how much it works for the other things. the stiffness, the rigidity, the slowness of movement, the balance, the walking, all the other symptoms of Parkinson's disease that we know are a problem. And so this is why I haven't been in a rush to send a lot of Parkinson's disease patients for it. And I've been much more confident sending my essential tremor patients for it. I have to do a little bit more digging. Does it help with the rigidity? Does it help with, walking or stiffness or movement in general? Again, I'm not sure how it would if you're only affecting one side, because most movement things, getting up, walking, are usually require both sides. But I have to see the data. And again, this is still a fairly new technology. I'm still learning more about it. As publications come out, I read more. As I get more experience with it, I do more. One of the big problems that I run into is it's not in Pittsburgh. We don't have one here at Allegheny Health Network. UPMC doesn't have one. So the closest place, which is where I usually send my patients to, is West Virginia University. Dr. Ann Murray runs their program down there. And so I refer patients down to her. I have talked to her on the phone, never met her in person, but I've talked to her. She's a very nice person. Cleveland Clinic also has this available. So that's usually where I'll send my patients to get more information and learn more. Again, the more that I do, the more that I see, the more available it becomes. I keep bugging important people that they should buy me one. They say no. I say, okay, I'm going to ask you again next month. They keep saying no, but eventually I'll wear them down. Trust me. And so once I get more access to it, more experience with it, I may have a different answer, but that's kind of my answer right now. Is there a lot more joint pain by everyone since COVID? Maybe. I mean, COVID definitely has wreaked havoc on a lot of my patients. In a lot of different ways, probably in joint pain, probably in movement, probably in tremor, probably in everything. COVID has not been a fun time for anybody for a variety of reasons, and it has definitely impacted a lot of my patients, both in terms of physical symptoms, but also in terms of social isolation and depression and mood symptoms have probably been hit the hardest. So I would answer that question with probably. I can't think offhand that I've noticed, oh yeah, man, I'm really noticing a lot of joint pain now that COVID's been here. Joint pain's always been a big problem in a lot of my patients. Again, coming back to the mechanical deficiencies. But yeah, probably more joint pain and more everything else since COVID. And is angiogenesis a treatment and potential cure? I mean, maybe. Again, I think we're still a ways away from it. So angiogenesis is basically reproducing or regrowing blood vessels in the brain. We know that blood vessels are a way that we, can help the health of brain tissue itself, much like stem cells. Again, the idea behind regrowing brain. When you think about a disease that is a neurodegenerative disease or a disease that does decrease the number of brain cells or shrinks the brain itself, in kind of obvious terms, if you can find a way to reverse that or regrow brain or resprout blood vessels or resprout connections, that seems like a great idea from a treatment or a potential cure. I'm just not sure how close we are. Again, we've been looking at stem cells for a long time. We've been looking at angiogenesis for a long time. I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of being able to do it repeatedly. And so I keep hoping and I keep waiting. And at the end of the day, we're going to keep an eye out on those studies, and they keep researching these things. Believe me, they keep trying to come up with ways to cure these things and slow down disease progression. And I'm all ears. This is a great question. So why do neurologists not suggest complementary therapies when they are not invasive, not traumatic to the body, and not that expensive with lots of potential upsides? I may have a disagreement with you in not that expensive. Expensive is relative. There are some that are very expensive. There are some that are not. But the short answer is A, we are not taught about it in medical school. We don't have, maybe I had a class on complementary therapies, maybe there was a lecture on, acupuncture, massage, Reiki, Tai Chi and yoga, supplements, things like that, but not a lot. This is not in mainstream medical school, medical training. Everything that I know about it, I've learned on the job. I've literally learned from patients, either from patients or reading about things that patients have asked. There are usually some lectures at our annual meetings that I try to pay attention to and see what's going on. But one of the first answers is lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge is probably the biggest answer for why, myself included, we are not very good at suggesting complementary therapies. The other answer is, again, we try to be really data-driven people. We like gold standard, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, right? This is the expectation for every medication approval. This is what we expect in terms of something that gets approved that we can recommend and say, this is definitely something that's worthwhile. You know how hard those are to do in any type of complementary therapy, over-the-counter supplement, medication where a drug company has $1 billion to invest in, that they're hard to do and they're expensive. And so you're not going to get those kind of trials usually, or that kind of data. And then it becomes more subjective, right? Then we're saying, well, we think maybe this is good, but I don't have the evidence that I have for a lot of other things. And you can see where that problem comes in. I'm trying to get better at that. I'm trying to get better at this. The more I learn, the better I get. And maybe other neurologists try too. I get the feeling a lot of people don't really care to learn more about these things. They're kind of stuck in their ways. They know their medicines, they know their treatment strategies or algorithms, and they see no good reason to change. I try not to fall into that trap. I try to keep an open mind. I try to learn as much as I can. And the more I learn, the more information I get, the better I'll be able to talk to people about these things. But that's probably why, there's a lot more to it than just try it and see what happens. I will have to look at this link here on the angiogenesis, but I will take a look at it.
Can I just say something to you, Dr.
Sure, you
Leichliter?
can.
Like, they're doing medical research, but they don't have clinical trials or the funding for that, because they mentioned they're doing medical research in the British Virgin Islands.
Mhm.
Because
But define medical research. Because medical research ranges from everything from cell lines to animal models to in-human trials. And there are very, very big differences.
They did the animal models, and now they're working on the human trials.
Exactly. And so I have seen things that are good in animal models that don't relate or correlate when you get to people trials. And this is why I reserve judgment until I see it in people trials. And I have a lot of reasons for why I think that is, but probably my favorite reason, or my number one reason, is, believe it or not, Parkinson's disease does not naturally happen in any other animal besides people. Every animal model that we have is man-made. We have done something to the animal. We've either given it a toxin, or we've destroyed part of the brain, or we have created every animal model of Parkinson's disease that exists. And I think this is part of the reason why some things do work in animal models that then don't work when they get to in-human trials. And again, I'm never against these things. I'm never against it. It's just that I can't recommend it or say, this is a great idea, you should go do this, until I get that type of information. I need to see it used in people. I need to see that it works and it's safe, really in good trials, before I can do it. And so that's what I would say. Not to say that angiogenesis or even stem cells or these other supplements don't work. It's just that before I can consciously or recommend something, I need to see better data. And that's kind of why I reserve it. That's all.
The thing that was interesting about this trial, it's non-invasive, like we were talking about. It's an inhaler through the nose to get up in the brain.
Yeah, and they've been working on that too. They've been working on complex targeting, where you can do that. You can breathe things in and it goes to where you think it would, where you need it to go and act. They've been working on that for a few years as well. Again, I'm interested in all of these things, just like you guys are. I'm not against any of these things. I'm really eager to see what we can do, because medicines are not the answer. Medicines are not the end all be all, and they are not the fix. As you guys all know, I don't have a single medicine that is curative. I don't have a single medicine that is disease modifying or slows down disease progression. And when you don't have those things, again, this is why I'm very slow to tell people, no, don't go do that, or don't look at this. If I had something better, okay, then I could say, no, don't go do that. Here, I have something that's proven. Since I don't have anything that's proven like that, I am interested in what everybody else is coming up with. I don't ignore science as far as I can. I do try to learn about as much as I can. It's just when it comes time to recommend things, I try to stick to my recommendations for what has really been tried and true and shown to work in people. That's all. I try to keep an open mind though. So keep sending me this stuff, because this is the best way that I learn about it. How does the brain implantation being done by Alex Whiting at Allegheny General for epilepsy relate to DBS and Parkinson's disease? Well, I have an idea of what Dr. Whiting is doing. And so a deep brain stimulator is actually approved for epilepsy, and that may be part of what he's doing, but epilepsy actually has other implantable devices that Parkinson's disease doesn't have. They actually have a completely intracranial device. They have learning and self-modulating devices. So epilepsy is about, I'm going to guesstimate maybe 10 years ahead of Parkinson's disease in terms of the technology. And the short answer is we steal a lot of things from other people, mainly cardiology. Cardiology is about 20 years ahead of neurology. But Parkinson's disease, we do steal from other things too. And so I do think the companies that have developed the deep brain stimulators are looking at this stuff. And at the end of the day, I think you're going to see some advancements, some improvements based on things that have been working in other conditions, particularly things like epilepsy. I don't think it's, go ahead.
They showed this on Channel 4 on the evening, news, but they didn't say what the device was, but it was all intracranial.
Right.
It does learning. And I
Right.
wonder, is that Medtronics or what? Who is the manufacturer of that device?
I want to say it's Medtronic, but I might be making that part up, but I will look into that. But you're right. They are further advanced than we are on the deep brain stimulator. And I'm hoping that the companies are seeing what we can do in epilepsy and trying to extrapolate that to Parkinson's disease. We're not there yet, but that's the goal I've been asking for them for a long time. All intracranial, small device, self-learning. I mean, this is the holy grail of what we're trying to get.
I just didn't understand how you would recharge the battery or replace it when the battery goes
Well,
dead.
so actually they're coming up with really good, really small batteries that last a long time. But you're right, a lot of time it does require another surgical procedure, which is something we have to keep in mind. The other thing about epilepsy is those devices aren't on constantly, at least not all the time. And so their battery life is probably longer than the things we do. I'm not sure. So what are the criteria for use of a pump? There might be actual criteria. My criteria are usually, again, and the only pump that I have experience with is a Duopa pump. The other pumps I haven't had readily available yet. They're available in Europe. They're still coming here. Usually what I'm looking for is somebody who responds to the medicine, but is having a lot of this up and down during the day. They're taking pills very frequently, every hour, every other hour. And then we also have to have somebody who I think would do okay with a pump, because a pump has another end in it. And that's the pump that we have available now has a tube placed. And most people, when I start talking about a tube, they stop listening to me. I'm not keen on tubes either. I'm a neurologist for a reason. I know how to take care of it relatively, but again, this is the issue that we run into. And so there's actually a lot of thinking that goes into the pumps that we have available. As these other pumps become things that we do, I think you're going to see them used more. I think they're going to be more readily available. If they really are the subcutaneous, kind of like insulin pumps, I think you're going to see them used more. And I'm very interested to see how they work, what they do, what they're effective for, what are the requirements. And so more to come on that one. I'm just going to keep going for a bit because I know I blocked you for a little bit. So I'm just going to keep answering a few questions if you guys will hang out. Do I identify a profile common amongst your Parkinson's patients type? I mean, kind of. Generally, the profile is, the number one thing that leads to Parkinson's disease is age. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but my patients usually fall into the elderly category. Theoretically, a while ago, it was thought to be a Caucasian disorder, but it turns out in the medical system, we're just really bad at inclusivity and diversity, and it's probably not accurate. But I would still argue that my patient population is still mostly Caucasian, although I think it's because, the other communities really haven't had access to or searched out or looked into good diagnosis and treatment strategies, not because it's probably more prevalent in white people. Although that's up in the air still. My patients are usually pretty highly educated. Again, I don't know if that's a thing or not, but they're usually highly educated. They read a lot, they study a lot, they bring to me things that if I had to kind of profile my typical patient, it usually falls into that category. Is that for sure? Is that black and white? Is that definitive? Probably not. But that's just what I see kind of the most. Is there any evidence of increased immunological disease with Parkinson's disease, particularly the scleroderma family or Sjogren's? I think so. So there was a report Oh, you're really taxing my brain here, which only fires at half cylinder every now and again anyway. There was a report, I want to say a couple years ago, that rosacea played a role or was correlated with Parkinson's disease, and that was thought to be related to an autoimmune condition, more along the lines of lupus and Sjogren's, I think. And so I do vaguely remember in my brain somewhere that there is a tie between autoimmune conditions or rheumatological conditions and Parkinson's disease. Do I see that commonly? I don't know. Again, I'm a neurologist, not a rheumatologist. So I usually say, hey, you should really see a rheumatologist for that. And I try not to think about, the Sjogren's or the scleroderma or things like that. I've definitely seen patients with both, but can I say that there's enough of a correlation there? I'm not sure, but I vaguely remember there being a report that there was. I don't know that I use that to our advantage or anything in terms of immunotherapy or things like that for Parkinson's disease, but it's definitely an interesting kind of connection. Are dairy products contraindicated? Yes, you should stop drinking milk and stop eating cheese. No, I don't tell people that. Is there evidence that maybe it's not good for Parkinson's disease? Yes. So I have read things to suggest that dairy can be tied to Parkinson's disease, more along the lines of an inflammatory thing, I think. I'd have to go back and see what they thought was the connection. But I do remember reading something that suggested that dairy products and Parkinsonism or Parkinson's disease can go hand in hand. Do I tell my patients not to eat dairy products? No. At the end of the day, I'm not sure the data is good enough for me to make blanket statements like you shouldn't eat dairy. Again, is dairy good for you to begin with? Well, I'm not sure. I'll leave that up to the nutritionists, the dietitians, things like that. The only report that I read about diet, at least in our journals, was that the Mediterranean diet's probably your best bet. I didn't think that was too much of a stretch because generally it's thought of as the healthiest diet on the planet. And so that's probably the best thing to go for. But I think there is some data to suggest dairy is not great, but no, I don't go out of my way to tell people they can't eat dairy. Donna.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I just, from this seminar, I've learned this new because she brought up that dairy, besides the pesticides, that it breaks down uric acid it breaks down your uric acid, and uric acid is supposed to be protective for the brain in Parkinson's people. So that's the first I heard about that, and I don't know. Yep. It's the same uric acid that causes gout, but
well, and what's interesting about that is the trial that they did to boost uric acid failed. So again, this is the problem that we have in Parkinson's disease and medicine in general, is things that we think make sense when you go to do the trial, because they did a trial of a medicine that boosted uric acid, which for some reason in the trial didn't actually cause gout. But when I had a patient who did it on his own, he got gout 3 times, which I thought was fairly interesting. And it turns out that study actually was negative for benefits in Parkinson's disease. And so I don't know, when you're trying to piece these things together, the hard part is that the body and the brain and the nervous system is so complex and complicated. We're not really all that good at being able to tie these things together. But yeah, I agree with what she said. I just don't know how to correlate it in Parkinson's disease and things like that.
Yeah, she was saying in that webinar to avoid dairy.
Yeah. No, that's written about. There's definitely some suggestion that dairy is not great, but it's not enough for me to go a blanket statement across the board. No, you have to stop drinking milk. No, you have to stop eating cheese, things like that. All right, I'll do a couple more and then I'll throw in the towel because Casey's getting antsy over there. Is there anything I can do for the dexterity of my hands and fingers? Work on it. I mean, the short answer to that is sometimes the medicines help, but at the end of the day, therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, stretching, exercises is probably going to be your best choice. And then we go from there. So continuing to try to do the things that are difficult for you is probably the best way to work on it. Is there any medicine that is specifically used to treat freezing? So freezing of gait is a problem in my patients. It leads to falls. It's a major, comorbidity or really suggestion of morbidity. And it's something I'm not very good at treating. There really is not a specific medicine that has been shown to be beneficial in freezing of gait. There's some medicines that have had some suggestion that maybe they're good for freezing of gait outside of the dopamine medicines, which I try to use. I'll use, again, some of the anti-Alzheimer's disease drugs. You'll see me use Exelon. You'll see me use Aricept, sometimes Namenda. There was a little bit of research into the stimulants. You'll see me try methylphenidate or atomoxetine. I'll use amantadine, even though the data is fairly weak. I will try literally anything because it's such a big problem in patients. But is there any actual evidence for this, or is there any literature or data to say, hey, this is a good idea? Probably not. I'm going to stop after this one. I'm just going to read it. I recommend singing with your Parkinson's disease loved one. Did this with mom as a warm up to her loud crowd meeting this week and got a great smile out of her and greater willingness to warm up. We sang Country Roads by John Denver. Who doesn't like Country Roads by John Denver? At the end of the day, I think that's a great idea for everybody. Again, singing is good speech therapy. It's a good way to work on voice. And so at the end of the day, I highly recommend it. Keep doing all the work that you're doing. And I know there's still a few more questions, but maybe Casey, you can kind of write those down and send them to me for next time. And hopefully next time I won't be on, I don't know if I am or not. I haven't looked that far in advance, but hopefully next time I won't be on call and get disrupted by different hospitals calling me. And with that, I will thank everybody and pass it back to Casey for a wrap up.
Thank you, Dr. Leichliter, and for extending your time. And I know there may have been someone on the call as well that didn't get in some questions. So I'll make sure you receive those for the next talk with the doc, as well as the ones that weren't answered today. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.